Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for The Raven, which is episode 6 of season 4 of Star Trek Voyager. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek as determined by my user polls. The episode to win my latest user poll is The Raven. So, The Raven is the 4th-season Voyager episode where Voyager's trying to negotiate passage through an alien space, and these aliens are being really picky about it. And then 709, something sets her off, a Borg signal, and she breaks free of Voyager and runs right through the alien space. So Voyager rushes to find her before the Bomar kill her. But when they get to her, even though she's under the impression that she's returning to the Borg, but really what she's doing is going back to the ship that she was on as a child, that she was captured from and assimilated by the Borg, and she relives the events of that assimilation and then realizes that Voyager is in fact the place she needs to be, and so she returns to the ship, and Voyager disable the Bomar and then have to leave their space and can no longer take the shortcut, but at least they have 7 back, so everything's fine and dandy. So this is the 6th episode of the 4th season. So 709, this is when they're still introducing 709. So really, I would actually call this the 3rd episode to really get into 709's character development and her new status relationship on Voyager. The first, I say, would be The Gift, which dealt mainly with her separation from the collective, and she refused to be a part of the crew until the very end of the episode. And then the second would be Day of Honor, which featured a plot of these aliens wanting to help these alien refugees, and the refugees turned out to be refugees from the Borg. When they found 709 was on the ship, they wanted to kill her, but Janeway refused to let them, and in fact even fought them off to do so, and that impressed 709. So I would say this is the 3rd episode in her character development after those two. It's not the 3rd episode because we also got Nemesis, but 709 was not in that episode at all. And also got Revulsion, which did feature a side plot with 709 when she was like flirting with Harry Kim, or Harry Kim was flirting with her, and she said, "Oh, let's copulate," or whatever, which I liked, but I wouldn't really consider that character development for 709. So this is, I think, the 3rd after. So Scorpion introduced her. The Gift separated her from the collective. Day of Honor just was a sidestep where she was realizing that Voyager wanted to protect her and started to feel guilt over what she'd done as a Borg. And The Raven, I think, was the huge step in establishing Voyager as her home. I think after this episode, this is the episode that really established Voyager as 709. So now, if you see my previous video, when this video was up for the poll, I mentioned before that I wanted to do a review for this episode because I love it. When I talked about it when I did my Season 4 Voyager review, I said good things about it. In fact, I put this in my top 50. I think it might have even been in my top 20, or at least top 25. I can't remember exactly. But I had this high up in the Voyager series, and watching this again, I do in fact still think very highly of this episode. In fact, I would say watching this episode makes me realize that I like what they did with 709's character so much better in the early years as opposed to the later seasons. I always go on about the later seasons, particularly season 7, which I think they kind of ruined 709. I wasn't really interested in her character development. They actually made it kind of boring and uninteresting. But going back, watching the origins here, I actually think they did a better job. And in fact, I've heard some opinions of some people saying that they still weren't sure what to do with 7. But I think that perhaps that not being sure was actually to the show's benefit. Because here you also get, like, you get a scene of her, and I think this is contradicted later on, but of course it's Voyager. Voyager always contradicts itself. But you get a scene where the doctor says that Seven needs to start eating, ingesting food, and so she goes to, he sends, who's like, oh, he makes some joke about Neelix's cooking, which I find annoying, but whatever, Voyager does that all the time, and sends her to Neelix, and you get this a lovely scene of Neelix, like, introducing her to food, you know, for the first time, and saying that she has to sit and she's not used to sitting down, and he's like telling her to chew and to swallow. That was a lovely scene. I think this seeing these early character development for Seven is like a real joy for me, and I think this episode in particular did an amazing job. Now, at first glance, like, the plot of this episode seems like a cliche. Oh, I'm going back to the Borg, because they already did this with 7 of 9 just a couple episodes earlier, which I think it was The Gift, or was it Day of Honor? No, I think one of those two. I think it was Day of Honor. One of those, she wanted to, you know, activate the signal to bring the Borg, and they had to stop her. So it seemed like this was just a rehash. They're just already doing the same thing. But that's just what it appears to be. It actually ends up being something entirely different. She misinterprets it as the Borg calling her home and her returning to Collective, and she breaks free and has that cool little shuttle fight with Tuvok. And I like the use of Tuvok in this episode as well. That was another strong use of something. Again, that was lost in later seasons. Because you saw Tuvok being a badass, going off in the shuttlecraft with Tom Paris, and he had this plan to go capture 7 of 9, and Tom Paris was just like, that's not a good plan, she's going to take you out easily. He's like, sorry, you got any better ideas? I'm just going to, and he went and did it, and 7 of 9 did take him out, but didn't kill him. And I love this because she's acting like, I'm going back to the Borg, you're going to be assimilated, and she was going to say, you're going to be assimilated, but then she was like, no, you're not going to be assimilated, I'm going to let you go. And Tuvok recognized that as, you're showing signs of sympathy. And it's amazing. I love the interactions between these two characters, because these are kind of similar, and there's very rare cases of Voyager when they put these two together, and it's a very interesting pair, because they're both sort of emotionless, but in like logical creatures, but in very different ways. So it's interesting seeing these two interacts, and I love how Tuvok would recognize the signs of emotion, human emotions within Seven, even if he doesn't fully understand them or have them himself. He still is able to recognize them and sort of use that to try to convince her, look, it's not really what you want to do, because you are obviously emotionally conflicted. And that was just amazing. And another thing about this episode is the imagery in this episode is absolutely amazing. Now, I must admit, when I first saw this episode, I only saw parts of it, and I wasn't paying full attention to it, and so I didn't think that highly of it. And when I first saw those, you know, those flashbacks, those dream sequence over it, whatever you want to call them, with 7 of 9, with the Borg calling them, and like you see a Borg screeching, it's like the sound of a raven, and then later you see the raven. It's very, very visual. And at first I dismissed those as like pretentious. It's just like, oh, they're trying to be all artsy. But when I actually sit down and examine this episode and look at this episode as a whole, they're not trying to be artsy. They are being artsy. It is actually very well done, because it fits into their characters. Not just, oh, let's have these cool symbolism just to look cool. It's actually meaningful. And of course, I mean, the obvious, maybe the meaning of the Raven was a bit obvious, because the ship she was capturing was called the Raven, and so she's having dreams of the Raven. But I think that actually makes sense, since she was a child and when she got assimilated, and so she wasn't fully aware of certain things, so it's her subconscious bringing up imagery to try to alert her to stuff that she may not clearly remember. And of course, she, being a Borg for so many years, for a couple of decades, of course, she kind of blocked all this out of her memory. And I think that's kind of the point of this episode. That is the resolution of the episode, is that 709 at the end realizes that the visions she's having, or the calling that she's hearing, was not the Borg calling her back. It was actually her parents. It was the origin of her parents, and she relives the trauma of being assimilated. Now, I do love how when the doctor was trying to figure out why she was having these hallucinations, he said, "Oh," and him and Janeway, I think, brought up that, "Oh, you experienced a traumatic incident," and she argues, she's like, "I wasn't traumatized by the Borg. I was raised by the Borg." But in retrospect, at the end of the episode, I think they're right. I think she was traumatized, and she was feeling these, visions because of that trauma. Now, I think her adult self doesn't look at the Borg as traumatizing. She looks at the Borg fondly. But when she was a little girl, she most certainly was traumatized when she saw her parents snatched away from her, and she was these huge creatures, scary creatures came and took her away. She was definitely traumatized, I think, but she buried that trauma underneath, and so she was no longer aware as an adult that she was traumatized. But being human again has sort of let some of those feelings resurface, and that's why I think this is the best episode to explore her transition from Borg to human, better than The Gift or Day of Honor, or especially anything they do in the future after this episode, because it really shows that sharp transition, the trauma that's brought up from the buried trauma, I should say, because she doesn't even recognize it as trauma. And of course, again, the scene where she's learning to eat, learning to sit down. I mean, I absolutely love it. And of course, the scene where they go to the Raven, to the ship, and she's having the visions. Talk about very well shot, very artistic, very beautifully done scenes. We get the flashbacks intermittent with 709 in present times running around the ship, and you see the flashbacks to convey what she's experiencing, that these memories that were buried are resurfacing of her parents yelling after her. And these scenes were beautiful. They were so well shot. They really convey the horror and the scariness and the sense of trauma that she felt in that moment, with her parents yelling after her, going, "Annika!" And then in present times, she kind of reverts to a child, where she gets in the crouching position and is like, "Mama?" and kind of starts crying. And Tuvok, I think it shows in this scene. Again, it was amazing having Tuvok be her guide through this journey, because it shows that he's a parent. It shows that he knows how to deal with children in situations like this, because he was coming off as, in his way, even though he's a Vulcan emotionless, he was coming off as a caring father who was looking after her and protecting her through this journey, through this rediscovering of who she actually is. And it was just amazing. It was absolutely beautiful, to be frank. And yeah, there's just the artistic way this shot, and you see the little girl Annika running away from the Borg, and then the angles that they use to show the Borg look bigger and scarier as they run after the little girl, and then they cut right back to 709 crouching as an adult. Absolutely amazing. I would have to say, my opinion of this episode actually went way up after watching it just now. I might actually had put it higher in my top 20 if I redid it. And that's the thing about top 20, is it kind of changed my mind depending on my mood or whatever. Because yeah, it's absolutely amazing episode. Although I will say the drawbacks of this episode is probably the scenes with the Da Vinci. Didn't actually have Leonardo da Vinci in this episode because they probably couldn't get John Rhys Davies. They were probably like, oh, we have John Rhys Davies. He's such an amazing Da Vinci. But then they realized the drawback of that is they can't get him in every episode because he's too high profile of an actor, and they probably couldn't afford to have him all the time. But they had his studio, his holodeck program, and a couple scenes at the start of the episode with 7 of 9 trying to paint and Janeway. That I didn't really. I was never into any of these holodeck things. Like I talked about this before. Each season they had a different one. In season 4, they were trying to push the whole Da Vinci thing, which I was never on board with. I didn't think it was horrible as some of the other ones, especially the Irish pub one of season 6. Nothing can be as bad as that. But or the resort from season 3, that was pretty bad too. But still, I think the only one I actually liked was the pool table one from seasons 1 and 2. This Da Vinci thing was, it's not as bad as the pub or the resort, but it's still pretty bad. And then they went back to it at the end, which I kind of feel was not the best way to end the episode, because they had a coda at the end where 7 is talking to Janeway after her experience, and they're in Da Vinci thing, and she's sort of realizing what happened to her parents and whatnot. I kind of didn't think this was the best ending for the episode. I kind of think it would have ended on a stronger note if they had not had that scene, and they just ended it with after they rescue Tuvok and 7 of 9 from the Bomar. But yeah, and so that's kind of a drawback to the episode, but it's nothing major. And of course, we also have the side plot with the Bomar, which wasn't the best thing in the world, but it was good. I think it was a good B plot that sort of complemented, and then it tied into the A plot, of course, eventually. And it was an interesting concept too, because I don't think they haven't really dealt with this, because it makes sense that Voyager's trying to do a straight line straight back to the Alpha Quadrant, so it makes sense they'd come across a space, an alien, species that has a huge space that they don't really want Voyager violating. And so instead of we have plots before, tons of plots over they will attack Voyager and Voyager will be under attack because they're entering their space. That was the whole thing with the Year of Hell. But this was a case where it was let's negotiate for the space. And so they start out, and these aliens are obviously, it's interesting because their technology is obviously inferior to Voyager. However, it's their space, so they vastly outnumber. So even a race with inferior technology can still, if they gang up, can still destroy Voyager. So they still had to negotiate with them, and it was interesting how unreasonable they were being, and they plotted a course for Voyager. It was like this, and everyone's like, oh my god. And so Jane was trying to negotiate, but while she's trying to negotiate, of course 7 freaks out, steals the shuttlecraft, and they're just like, oh, you're incompetent. I actually thought that was funny that they called Janeway incompetent. I'm sure there's many people out there who would agree with these aliens. I'm not so much of a Janeway hater. I don't think she's incompetent. I just think these aliens are being assholes. And of course, because she wasn't being incompetent, she just wanted to save 7's life, or they just wanted to kill her. And I love how this was a good character moment for Janeway. She had to stand up to the Bomar. And of course they sacrificed the shortcut through their space, because after they defied the Bomar, they actually fired on their ships in order to save 7 of 9 and Tuvok's life. After they did that, there was no way they were letting them through their space, so Janeway had to say, okay, we have to turn around. I guess there will be no shortcut for us. But that was a sacrifice she was willing to make in order to save 7 of 9. And again, spoke very highly of her character. This was just such a great episode. But I guess I'll just mention very briefly. I don't want to talk about it too much because it doesn't really have to do with this episode, but I have to mention Dark Frontier. Now, I already did a review for Dark Frontier where I covered all this, but not in as much detail. But watching this episode again, I can't help but think of Dark Frontier, because Dark Frontier was the follow-up, so-called follow-up to this episode, where it showed her parents in more detail, but as I covered in my Dark Frontier review, it was totally and completely and utterly inconsistent with this episode. It did not keep any continuity, it did not keep any canon. The writer of the episode even said, I don't give a crap about continuity, I don't care about canon, I'm just going to do whatever the fuck I want. And that's so obvious, so watching this episode actually irritates me more, not for anything this episode did, but how they just disregarded all awesome canon established in this episode in that stupid Dark Frontier episode, which I can't stand. So watching this episode makes me hate Dark Frontier more, because this episode's so amazing and that episode's so shitty. But again, I covered this in Dark Frontier because in this episode the parents were played by different actors who were like much better. They were older. The ones in Dark Frontier were goofy, were younger. They were showed as Borg hunters, whereas in this episode, Janeway said they were brilliant scientists. She didn't say anything about them studying the Borg, and which she would have if they had. That was a retcon for Dark Frontier. And like in Dark Frontier, they had boxes of files. They said, oh, we got these from the Ravens. I just watched this episode. They didn't get shit from the Raven. The Raven freaking fell off a cliff, and Tuvok and 7-9 had to run for their lives. They didn't have time to download jack shit. But anyway, I'm sorry. That's getting into Dark Frontier, so I don't want to be negative. If you want to hear me talk negative, you can watch my review about Dark Frontier. This episode was amazing. And again, this is the better... There was season 4 and early season 5 was so much better at developing 709 and exploring her character. I think after Dark Frontier is when they started going downhill with 709's character journey and became a lot less interesting. So this is the golden years. This is the golden episode, I shall say. Anyway, my rating for The Raven out of 10. Previously, when I did my top 10 episode, I think I gave this episode a 9. I'm upping that to a 10. My rating for The Raven out of 10 is a 10, the best. Again, just exploring the way, the nuance to this episode, the way they explored her backstory, the amazing cinematography, the amazing, well-edited flashbacks, the use of the Raven with the Borg screaming the ring, and this is some of the best use of imagery, cinematography, character development. Even the scene with Neelix, I just did a stream recently talking about how Neelix is underappreciated and he has some good moments. This is a good Neelix moment. This is a good 709 moment. It's a great Tuvok moment. It's a great Janeway moment. It's just a great Voyager episode. Anyway, that is it for my review of The Raven. So now it is time to see which episode I will review next. Okay, so let's find out the options for the next poll. Let's start with the original series option, and that is going to be Tomorrow is Yesterday. The Enterprise is thrown back in time to the 1960s Earth. Some people like this episode and count it as one of the best time travel episodes. I don't. I don't like this episode. I think it's a bit boring. It's a bit silly. This is the first time travel episode Star Trek has ever done, and I think they didn't really know how to do it right yet, and they were still kind of learning. But if you want me to go into more detail, you can select that as your option. Okay, so now let's go to the Next Generation. The option is going to be Unification. Well, it says Unification Part 2, but I would do both parts. So both parts of Unification, the Spock 2-parter. Let's not skate around this. This is the 2-parter with Spock, and they go to Romulus. A lot of varying opinions on this episode. I think it probably is held in higher esteem because Spock is in it, but it's not held in that high of esteem. I don't think it's... And I would put it somewhere in the middle as well. There's some good things about it, some boring things about it. It was okay. So if you want me to explore that more, I can do that. Alright. So Deep Space Nine option is going to be Q-less. I think this was an option before, but I haven't done it yet, so I'm going to go ahead and stick with Q-less. I did watch this episode recently for my Season 1 Deep Space Nine review, and I did a quick review on it on that video, but I didn't go in that much detail, so if you want me to go into more detail, you can request Q-less. The only Q appearance in Deep Space Nine and there's a reason why he didn't appear, because this episode wasn't very good. Alright, so the Voyager option. Voyager option is Tattoo. A lot of people hate this episode. I think this is an option on my polls before as well, but again, I haven't reviewed it yet, so it's going to be an option. A lot of people hate this episode. I actually hated it when I first saw it. I actually grown to like it a bit more. There's a lot of people say it's racist or, like, not very kindly to Native Americans. I'm not so sure I agree. I mean, I can see that point of view, but I think it's fine. I think it's actually a good exploration, or at least it was well intentioned. I'll put it that way. It was a good exploration on Chakotay's backstory, so I like that. Like the reveal of the aliens, that was kind of dumb, but I can get into this more if you just select that. Okay, so now we'll go to the random number generator for Enterprise or the animated series. We'll see what it comes up with. Alright, so 1. It came up with season 1 of Enterprise. So, oh yeah, get the episodes first. So I believe it's 26, I want to say. 26 episodes of season 1. Number 24. Okay, so what is season 1, episode 24? That is the big question. It is going to be Desert Crossing. Oh my god, this episode is boring. You see my rating for it, I gave it a 1. Well, that was a while ago. We can see if I still fail, but all of season 1 sucks. Or not all of it, but most of it. And this is certainly included in that most that sucks. I do not like season 1 of Enterprise, and I do not like this episode. It was boring. Definition of boring, wasted time. So if you want to force me to watch this crappy episode, yes, you can go ahead, and I will go ahead and review it. So those are your options for the next poll. I will put a link in the description below to Straw Poll. You can follow the link and go to Straw Poll and vote for which episode you want me to review next. And I will be back in about a month's time, roughly about a month, to review the episode. I'll probably will close the poll about a week or two after I put it up, because I do make the videos in advance now. So maybe I'll allow 1 week or 2. Maybe I'll be mysterious about this. But anyway, thank you so much for watching. I do many other videos on Star Trek. As I said, I just started my series on Deep Space Nine, where I review every episode 1 season at a time. I also cover many other shows like Game of Thrones, Lost, The Expanse, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.